Progress, on the other hand, is changing our focus to the journey. So in a progress mindset, we'll say, okay, the most important thing is how I travel the path to where I'm going.
When you're motivated because you want to serve somebody or help somebody or make somebody's life better, it's this wonderful liberating feeling where you are kind of released from that sense of separateness.
Failure is information that you did not have. And what failure is telling you is that your information and your ideas were not correct in painting the right picture of reality.
There's a famous quote by a Zen master who said, one of his students asked, "Master, please explain what is Zen?" And he said, "When I eat, I eat. When I sit, I sit. When I walk, I walk. This is Zen."
That is Zen,
Boom.
and that is the sort of
truth bomb.
That is the sort of thinking that I just love. The thing that will shock you the most about reality is how unbelievably interesting it is when you bring your full awareness to it.
I remember a story where Sri Chinmoy, our teacher, asked his students what was the main quality of the earth, like what defined the earth as a quality. And it was a very open question. His students were coming up with all kinds of beautiful qualities like resilience, transcendence, suffering, and in the end Sri Chinmoy said, "No, it's actually..." Hello, Seeker friends, and welcome back to the Acceptance of Life podcast, episode 6. This episode is all about success versus progress. Which one of those two brings more lasting happiness and fulfillment in our lives? We also speak about failure and which valuable lessons failure can teach us. We talk about the role of Gaman, a Japanese idea that means enduring suffering with dignity and poise. The role of competition. Competition is not only about ego boosting, it can be a valuable tool to bring out the best version of ourselves. Last week, Vajan ran a 100-mile race, and we dive into that and we talk about the race and which kind of lessons he took away from that for his own life. And in a broader sense, we talk about the role of exercise, sports, running in particular, in the progress-based lifestyle. So, an episode with lots of beautiful takeaways for your spiritual journey. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Okay, and welcome back to the show. Good to see you, Vajan.
Hey, lovely to see you, Abhinava.
So today I wanted to talk about success and progress. And I'm actually going to start by reading out something that Sri Chinmoy wrote on the topic. And then I'll let you riff with that.
Okay.
Yes, this is from a lecture that he gave many, many years ago. Meditation defines success and progress in life. Success is the body dance of self-gratification. Progress is the heart song of self-perfection. Success says, "I am above you, you are below me." Progress says, "I only want to be ahead of myself." I'm never happy with my success life. No matter how many ways I'm successful, I always see a beggar in myself. And this beggar in me cries and cries because he feels that there is insufficient reality in him. But when I make progress, I see in myself a king, an emperor. At that time, I see the whole world as my own, very own, for I claim the entire world, and the entire world claims me. So that's a poetic way of defining those two concepts. What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, that lines up very well with some of the ideas I was thinking about with the difference between success and progress, and the effect that it has on our experience of life. So Sri Chinmoy's poem there really captured, I think, a lot of the essence of the difference between the two and the way that they don't lead us to the same type of experience.
Yeah, so I think it's good to note that there is a difference. They're really two different concepts, and they may seem the same, but I think especially in the spiritual life, there is a distinction between those two.
Yeah.
So we're gonna delve into that today.
Yes, exactly. And I think this topic as well, it actually ties together a lot of the things we've been talking about in previous episodes, because this idea and this topic is really almost the distillation of what the two approaches are to the game of life, the spiritual approach versus the human or the material approach to life. And so let's start talking about the common picture that people have of success in life, and perhaps why that is not actually what people want. And so,
very good. That is also my aim. That is what I was hoping we could do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
for me, if we look at the idea of success, So if we look in from our cultural perspective here in both living in the Western world, the picture that we have of success, there's kind of a few different aspects to what people sort of dream of, the type of success that they're aiming for. And so I think for a lot of people, first and foremost would be material success. So having enough wealth and resources and being abundant in that fashion. And then the other types of success I think people are looking for is fame, which I think fame is quite interesting because, like, if we look at each of these ideas one by one as well, we can, if we drill into them a little bit and look at them in a little bit of a deeper level, we'll often see that we already know that that's not actually what we want. So a good example is a lot of people think they want to be famous. And I think what fame actually is a proxy for actually having power or being powerful. Because if you follow a lot of these things back, they're really at the deepest level is actually a search for security. And I think that's really because we're biological creatures here and we know that we can suffer and we know that we're living in a finite world of material goods.
And life is uncertain. There's all these uncertainties.
Exactly. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. And to try and deal with uncertainty, we aim for security. And we're aiming really for trying to protect us from ourselves physically and materially from the harsh realities of life. So that's what we're looking for when we think we want to be wealthy. Really, we want to insulate ourselves from the uncertainty and the dangers of life. So we want to have so much resources that we think we're going to be protected.
But isn't there also an aspect there that is connected to status? We want to elevate our status to be in a better social standing. And that is definitely what fame provides, right? Fame opens a lot of doors. We are able to, feel that we have status in life, and that way we can elevate our position.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely an aspect of that, but I still think if you follow that back far enough, it's an attempt to insulate ourselves from the uncertainty and the dangers of life. We think if we put ourselves in a high enough social position, that will in some way insulate us from the problems of life. Many of these things that we're looking for are really simply an attempt to protect ourselves from the uncertainty of life, which really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how well known and famous you are. It does not protect you from natural disasters. It doesn't protect you from accidents, from illnesses. It doesn't protect you from all of the chaos of the world that at any moment can step into your life. And living here in Christchurch, actually, I've got a first-hand experience of that and having seen that play out, because for us here in Christchurch in 2010, 2011, we had a series of really devastating earthquakes here. And so I really saw firsthand that people had spent their entire life trying to build up some level of safety and security from the chaos of the world. In one moment, houses were destroyed, businesses were destroyed. So all of these ways that you try to protect yourself from the chaos of the world, the power of nature and the power of just reality around us is so overwhelming that even with your best efforts, you're never really going to be able to protect yourself fully from the uncertainty of the world. So if you've made the aim of the game of life for you to try and achieve security, it's an impossible task, because either the world or your own body is going to betray you at some point. And so all of your hard-earned resources and fame and status and power and all of these things in those moments, they actually aren't worth anything. And so I saw that myself. So my business and my house were both destroyed by a big earthquake in 2011.
You were in your shop when it happened, right? I remember phoning you right after it happened, and I was like so concerned. And tell the story.
So we had a large earthquake in September 2010, and it was really powerful, but it happened late at night, and there weren't many people out on the street. And we seemed to get away from that pretty much relatively unscathed, the city. So a few buildings fell down and a few places got damaged. And I mean, everything shook a lot. So I was at my house and, everything fell off the bookshelves, everything fell out of the cupboards. And so it made a total mess. but it didn't destroy the city. And so we felt like we'd really dodged a bullet. And so people were quite pleased with how that went, because New Zealand is very geologically very active and dynamic country. One name for New Zealand is the Shaky Isles, because New Zealand throughout time has constantly had earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and things like this. And so that was in September 2010. Then in February 2011, I was in my shop, and I remember a lot of people, because it's a musical instrument store, it's full of different things that make sound. So you've got wind chimes hanging up, and you've got sitars hanging on the wall, and you've got drums, and you've got all these things that are going to make a sound. And I remember people were jokingly saying to me, "Oh, imagine being in your shop when the earthquake happened. Imagine all the sounds that would happen." And so it was around lunchtime in 2011 in February, and I was in my shop, and I heard the sound coming towards me down the street, and it sounded like a train was coming through the buildings next door. It was this really incredibly powerful, visceral experience of this wave coming towards you, this destructive wave. And when it hit my shop, I felt, obviously everything started shaking. Everything was moving side to side and up and down at the same time. So it was very different to the earthquake we'd already had. And all of the instruments started falling down and crashing together, and it was incredibly discordant. So I can tell you, if you ever thought it would sound wonderful to be in this cacophony of musical instruments in an earthquake, it just doesn't quite work out like that. Yeah. And very quickly the power cuts off. So suddenly everything went dark, and then the front part of the building actually collapsed. So the veranda over the street collapsed. And so suddenly I'm standing in the dark, everything's moving. And I didn't have time to move anywhere. I just stood in the middle of the shop, and this huge cloud of dust came through the front window. So as the front of the building collapsed, this big cloud of dust came in, and this lasted for 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And at that point it stops. And then you're standing there and everything's dark and everything's broken and on the ground, and the front of the building's collapsed. And it's just like, wow, that was really... You almost don't have time to panic or anything. I just stood there, let the experience pass, and then you have to suddenly go from the world you were living in is no longer exists. Like a new world has just been born.
What did you see when you stepped outside your shop?
When I stepped outside, so I couldn't go out the front because it was a collapse, but I stepped out the back door, and it looked like a World War II bombing scene from somewhere in Europe. So there was just piles of bricks everywhere. So buildings had collapsed, walls had collapsed. And so you step out into this apocalyptic scene, and then suddenly you have to start dealing with a whole different reality. And so any idea you had of how the world was going previous to that has suddenly changed. Your life has changed, everything has changed. And so I checked on my friends, I did what I could, and then I headed to my house, and my house was kind of twisted on its foundations, and everything was broken. And the house ended up having to be demolished, and my business, the building that was in, ended up having to be demolished. So everything changed radically. But what I most remember about that time was, I think the next day, I couldn't live in my house anymore. So luckily some friends on the countryside took me in. So I went out and I was staying at their house. And I remember the next day going for a run, and the most powerful, poignant memory that I have from that time is on this run, suddenly my awareness and my consciousness changed. So I was running, and it was a beautiful evening, and there was a moment where I really realized that every single thing in my life I could walk away from, and my life would still continue on, and I could still be completely happy, and my life could still be completely perfect despite the loss of all of those physical things. I realized that all of those physical things were not the important things in my life. They did not define my happiness or my success. Like my house...
So you were still as happy as you had been before the earthquake.
Exactly. And that was almost shocking because obviously so many people lost so much and many people died, and it's a very tragic circumstance to go through. But if your happiness and the state of your life is based on some inner well-being, or some inner state of consciousness, or some inner practices, those things remain no matter what happens in the outer circumstances. You can have everything be destroyed. You could walk away and you could still be completely content, because I was living a life that was meaningful to me. I was living my life in a way that aligned with my values and made my life feel meaningful and important to me.
Yeah, and normally that is a theory that many people can have. Like, yes, it should be like that. If you're centered within, but you had an actual practical experience of that, so that is makes it even more powerful. You lived it
Yes.
through, for real.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a remarkable thing. And you saw so many people in the city that I live in here. I think it developed an incredible level of resilience. And it also called a lot of people to radically change their lives because they realized that they were playing that game of success, of trying to achieve some sort of level of outer success or material
Comfort,
success. And
security.
and at the end of the day, all of that is going to be taken away from you. And so a lot of people, I think, either changed, they might have moved away, tried something different, changed careers. So it was it's a really chaotic, and there's so much upheaval. But also from that, I think people who live through those experiences realize that perhaps the outer success is not what they're looking for. And they start to think that perhaps there's some other form of success.
Did you find that happened in your city, that many people kind of went, let's say, searching within
Yeah, definitely.
for another reality?
There's definitely people take it two ways. Like if you're too attached to the game of success in your material situation, it was very traumatic. And so I don't want to downplay the trauma that a lot of people suffered from that. But also, I think it was a great reminder to everyone that there is no security here. The nature of the reality we live in is uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that never really leaves you. Like once you've had that type of experience, because your life is so different from one day to the next, from 1 minute to the next.
Yeah.
Because for months and months and months, the whole central business district was closed off, so there was no way for me to do
Yeah.
business or,
Well, that's interesting what you said about uncertainty, because I remember a story where Sri Chinmoy, our teacher, asked his students what was the main quality of the earth, like what defined the earth as a quality. And, it was a very open question. And I heard his students were, coming up with all kinds of, beautiful qualities like, I don't know, resilience, transcendence, suffering, all these kind of things. And in the end, Sri Chinmoy said, no, it's actually uncertainty. Uncertainty is the defining quality of life here on Earth.
Yeah.
And that really shook me when I heard that. It was like, wow, it's uncertainty. And it's true when you think about it, there's so much uncertain. It's like you say, you had an experience where from one day to the next, your whole life is turned upside down, just from 1 second to the next. And this can happen in anybody's life. And it can happen through an event or through somebody that you lose or a relationship ending or an accident that you have. So I had an accident myself now 3 years ago where I broke my hip. I fell off my bike. And literally from 1 second to the next, your life has changed. You're incapacitated for like 6 weeks and you can't work and you're in a hospital bed and everything. And so, yeah, I appreciate, in hindsight, I really appreciate events like that because they really throw you back to what is important in your life and especially into your inner life. So like you, I was not unhappy at all when it happened. I was like, okay, I managed to accept the reality pretty quickly. So the next day already, I was in the hospital bed and was like, okay, I accept. I totally saw for the next like 6 weeks how my life was completely different. And I was fine with it. And then I really realized, yes, it is the real wealth is here, is within. And it doesn't matter what happens to you outwardly.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I do remember when you had your accident, I talked to you a few days afterwards, and I was really amazed by your calmness and your cheerfulness despite the accident. So that was really a testament to you actually living out some of those ideas.
Yeah, thank you. I just have to cough just a second.
Yes, please, go ahead.
We'll cut this out, but gosh, wow, that was really, I don't know what that was all about. Jeez. Whoa.
Hey, you need to have a lie down for a minute.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm good. So pick it up.
Okay. And the other point I want to make about success is, so let's think about what someone might think of as the success they're looking for. And so perhaps you think, okay, the success I'm looking for is getting a particular job or getting a particular outcome in a field. So say someone's got their social media and their big goal is to get a certain number of likes or a certain number of comments or a certain number of follows. So they've got some sort of objective measure of what they think they want to achieve. The problem is your goal in that moment is a static goal. And the universe we live in is a transformative universe. So already your goal is not lining up with reality. So your goal could be to have a certain amount of money, or to get a certain amount of likes, or to achieve a certain level or performance in a sport or activity. And so all of those things are static. And so when you achieve them, they give you no lasting satisfaction because the universe continues to move on. So you think, oh my God, if I just had $1 million, I could then relax and then I could really be happy. The problem is, as soon as you earn $1 million, the universe and the world is still moving on. And you think, oh God, I need a little bit more actually. Like that's not enough now. Like that, I need to get more. And when you really look at it as well, you think that you're going to have security and safety and peace of mind when you get your $1 million. But in reality, what happens, you achieve that goal and you realize that, first of all, the universe is moving on and you need to keep up with that. But also, it takes a lot of work to look after that resource. So if you have $1 million, it doesn't just look after itself for the rest of your life. Suddenly you have to worry about, okay, where should I invest it? What should I do with it? What's the right thing to do with it?
I mean, it invites a whole host of different problems, because now you have to deal with people who are coming to you because you're rich, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the same problem with being famous. Like, people think it's nice to be famous, but I think it can be a complete curse, because you lose your anonymity. You can no longer walk on the street and, everybody knows who you are if you're really famous. And it completely changes your life. And I think these are secondary conditions that people don't realize when they desire these things.
And it's even worse when you actually become a public figure. People talk about you. People talk about you endlessly. And that's incredibly difficult for a human being to deal with. That there's people talking about you, having opinions about you, writing things online. And I think a lot of people, as they become famous, that becomes one of the great curses, is that any moment they can go online and see 1,000 different people with 1,000 different opinions about what you're doing. And that brings forward your anger and frustration. And the problem is as well, is because we're so sensitive to negative information, all it takes is one person to write something hurtful and harsh towards us online. And then the million likes and the thousands of fans who said something nice, they all pale into insignificance. And instead, we're focused entirely on this one disgruntled person.
Well, and imagine being a public figure and making a mistake, and everybody sees your mistake, and then not one person, but thousands or millions of people are hating on you. So how tough to deal with that is that? I mean,
so I think when we actually really logically look at what do we really want, you start to realize that these stories of what we want are simply handed to us by our culture. And it was that idea we've talked about earlier, that nobody lives without a story. And the story tells you what's valuable and where you should point your attention. And if you don't create your own story, your culture will provide a story for you. And unfortunately, for those of us who are looking for meaning and purpose, if we haven't come up with our own set of values to try and achieve that happiness, we'll tend to fall into the trap of this sort of Western mindset of outer success rather than the concept of progress. And
it's so ubiquitous, this yearning for success. I mean, you just have to open social media or nowadays listen to any kind of podcast, and people are always about their success in life and how to achieve it, and they want to be successful. And it's not bad to strive for success, but I think be aware that it's not going to make you happy by default. And that's why I wanted to talk about progress, because I think that's where true happiness lies. And that's a different striving. It's the search within. It's the search for what we talked about, these deeper inner values. And that's where the true happiness lies. And that I would say that we call progress. You make progress, you grow as a human being. And that is a completely different trajectory than the trajectory of success, which is so, I don't know, it's so one-sided.
Yeah, or it's one-dimensional, I'd say. So we've chosen one thing that we can measure, and we've put all of our value into that one thing. So it might be the dollars in your bank account, or the number of followers you have, or the position that you have in society, or the job, or the role, or title that you have. And so as I said, all of those things are static, and they're not moving forward. And I think in what Sri Chinmoy said about progress is that progress, there's a constant sense of movement and transformation in progress. And so if we look at the way we frame our goals, with a success goal, we will say, this is the outcome I want to achieve at the end of the process. And so we totally devalue the journey to get there, and we put all focus on the outcome, the destination. And we think if we get to that destination, whether it's by hook or by crook, then we can be happy. Progress, on the other hand, is changing our focus to the journey. So in a progress mindset, we'll say, okay, the most important thing is how I travel the path to where I'm going. So we can still have a goal. So we can still be aiming towards something, but instead of that being the only thing that we're valuing, in the progress mindset, we're saying, no, what's important is how do I carry myself along the journey to that goal? What sort of qualities do I bring to bear?
Very true. And I'm reminded of when I ran my first marathon.
Yeah.
Because that's a very goal-oriented endeavor. But I remember that what I enjoyed most about that was training for it. So, the hours running, I was living in Paris at the time. I was working in a vegetarian restaurant that was run by students of Sri Chinmoy in Paris. And I was training for my first marathon, and I was running through all the different parks of the city.
Yeah.
And I felt myself getting fitter. I felt my body, the capacity increasing. My joy in running was increasing. And the marathon itself was great. And I truly enjoyed it. But it was like the whole build up to the marathon that was really the most enjoyable. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? The process-oriented approach.
And I think that like running is a good example of that, because when you see someone who has done this really good block of training and done everything they can to turn up on race day, they can then choose the event. They can look at it in two ways. In one way, they can look at it as an examination, and it's a pass or fail. Either they achieve their goal. So maybe you wanted to run under 3 hours for the first time. So that's your goal. And that then becomes the judge. And so in some ways, it becomes the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Because if you don't achieve your goal, suddenly you feel like the whole process was a failure. So all of those experiences you had and all of the discipline and hard work and concentration and focus and determination that you worked on and developed, suddenly you think, oh God, it was all for naught. It was all a waste of time. But if your mindset going into the event is that, okay, this is an experience where I'm trying to progress, I'm trying to learn and develop and grow as a human being, then you'll say, when you get to the race day, instead of it being a judge, it becomes a celebration, because already it's a great victory. If you do 3 months of preparation for an event, that's already a tremendous victory, that you had the willingness and the eagerness and the enthusiasm to do that. And so you should be incredibly proud and happy with your achievement already. And the event then should be like a celebration of what you've done to get to that point. So I always see that people are often approaching an event as this great terrifying thing that, oh my God, this is going to be the thing that determines whether the last 3 months of my life were a great success or a complete waste of time. And to me, that's so sad, because it's also so unrealistic. It's not how life feels. Life is what happens on a moment-to-moment daily basis. And so we should be celebrating the successes all along the way, rather than putting all of our eggs in this one future basket where we think, okay, at that point, if I achieve that goal, then I'll let myself be happy.
Excuse me. We'll cut this out again. I was battling a little bit of a cold, so I think it's a residue of that.
Drink.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. And I'm just reminded of a little aphorism of Sri Chinmoy, which I wrote down. He said, success is afraid of failure, but progress is not. And it reminds me of one of your races, or a couple of the races that you did, the ultra distance Mont Blanc, the UTMB, Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, the famous race that happens in August, climbing up the Mont Blanc in France. You did that like 2 times, and you didn't finish. And you're an excellent runner, and you very often place in your events. And this was one of the, it was really on your bucket list to complete this race. But I always admired the way that you dealt with that. It was not like you didn't see that at all as a failure. So maybe talk about that, how that was in your experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a really important point as well, because we've been talking about success as we've been talking about people wrongly aim for a static point and think that success is some static thing that once you achieve it, then you have it for good, which is not really the nature of anything. But if we flip it around and look at it the other way as well, I think that's really useful, because we often fear failure because we think that failure is some fixed, eternal thing, that once you fail, it's a static thing. You've achieved failure. That's what you've got. And you've got to carry that around with you for the rest of your life. But instead, failure is what I like to think of failure is failure is information that you did not have before you did whatever it was that you failed at. So you have a plan for the world and you have a plan for an event or a career or an experience or whatever it is. And what failure is telling you is that your information and your ideas were not correct in painting the right picture of reality. So, for example, if I'm preparing for a race and then I fail at the race, say, and the race doesn't go how I thought it was, it's telling me that in some way I did not see the situation in its entirety and I had something wrong. So it's actually giving me really useful feedback that in some way I wasn't actually lined up properly with reality. And so that's always useful for me. So maybe I trained too much, or maybe I trained too little, or I needed to have more rest, or whatever it was. It's always giving you information that you can actually then use to better yourself. Whereas if you only have success just reinforces that, okay, yep, you're on the right track. But it doesn't tell you in any way where you're lacking or where you're not quite in alignment with the world. And so whenever I do have an experience like that, I just take it as a learning experience. And I really see that it's got information that will actually make me better than I was in the future. And so a lot of people, and especially sports people, often talk about that it's actually your failures that actually teach you more than your successes. But
Well, it's kind of like a child that's learning how to walk, right? When a child is a year old and it's taking its first steps, it's falling down every step.
Yeah.
But it doesn't see falling down as a failure. It knows that falling down is part of the process of learning how to walk.
Yeah.
So that's what a failure is to the child. It's just in the process of eventually achieving success. And the child doesn't give up, even though he falls down 40 times, 100 times.
Yeah.
And, when that child, if it would have our attitude as an adult attitude, after maybe 3 or 4 times of falling down, it probably tell his mom, Mom, this walking business is not really for me. I'm not good at it. Let's just forget it. And we'd all still be crawling through life. But because the child has that determination and that wonderful attitude to falling down as being part of the process, so I think that's a great way to learn from for us as well. When we approach any kind of event, something that's difficult, that needs a lot of practice, then every time we, quote unquote, fail, it's just that little child, we're just falling down and we just get up again and try again. And eventually we will be successful, just like the little child eventually learns how to walk. If we just continue and never give up. And that's one of the most important lessons that I learned from my teacher is he always said, never give up. Like whatever you do, never give up. And that's like a beautiful formula for success and for progress.
And failure only is truly a failure when you do give up. So until then, it's simply an experience that is leading you towards the goal that you've set for yourself. And the one thing I'd invite people to think about failure as well is sometimes it's better to gloriously fail than it is to badly succeed. And what I mean by that is sometimes you can get by with what you're doing. You're doing just enough to achieve the success or the outer result that you're looking for, but you're actually not doing it in the right way. You're kind of stumbling your way into being successful. And perhaps you're doing it by hook or by crook. You're cutting corners and you're taking advantage of other people. And in those situations, you think, oh, well, I'm still getting the result I was looking for. I'm still making money, or I'm still getting likes, or I'm still successful in one way or another. And so you're not learning the lesson then when you're badly succeeding. And sometimes when you gloriously fail instead, you start to actually see all of your shortcomings. You see the ways in which you're not living up to your potential and not lining up with reality. And so in those situations, I would much prefer to actually gloriously fail and then see all of the ways I can improve than to live in this world of thinking that I'm doing better than I am because I'm just managing to sort of sneak through. And at some point, always, if you're succeeding, but I think you're doing it in the wrong way, at some point, either your own conscience or the universe will catch up with you. So it's just a matter of time. And so perhaps having a big failure now is actually preferable because it's going to speed things along. Like if you take each time you fail as the best possible teacher, Because if you look at it honestly and with real awareness, you'll know in some way. Like you can even ask yourself, if you ask yourself, okay, where did I sell myself short here? Like where did I cut corners? Where did I do less than my best to get to this point? And you'll often come up with things that you realize, okay, I wasn't my best self in this situation because of X, Y, and Z. And obviously sometimes there's going to be situations outside of your control. You might get sick, or you might have an accident, or some of the uncertainty of the world can jump in. But I think more often than not, we should always try and take the responsibility ourselves for our failures and realize that probably somewhere along the line we made decisions that weren't ideal and that didn't lead us to where we wanted to go. So it's
so
like
take us back. Yeah, just sorry to cut in, but just take us back to that moment when you were, on the Mont Blanc. And you realized that, you were not able to finish. I remember that you were just walking from aid station to aid station, but you were so cheerful.
Yeah.
What happened there?
When I look back on those races, so 2 times I attempted it, and 2 times I had to drop out from the race, from the 100-mile race there, it is, first of all, one of the hardest 100-mile races, and it's also the most competitive. So there's a really high bar to reach to be successful there. And both times coming into it, I had some physical issues. So my body wasn't quite where it needed to be. And both times I really tried my best to get myself in the best possible position to give my best performance. But everything you pay a price for. And so my other races that I'd done during the season had often gone very, very well. And then in some ways, I can see that it was almost like I was being greedy. It was like I wanted to do all of these and I wanted to do this as well. And your physical body over one summer only has so much capacity to give. And so, especially when
it seems that you didn't pay it enough respect in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. And that particular race is one of the great teachers, because many of the world's best runners turn up there every year and fail spectacularly. And so I think that's a place you can go and you can gloriously fail, and you see the areas in which you came up short. As you may know, I also ran a 100-mile race on the weekend just been.
Yes, so I do know. I just don't know how you did. We haven't even talked about that. So maybe that's a good way to talk about.
So that was the Tarawera 100-mile race. And so
where is that?
So that's in central North Island in the town of Rotorua in New Zealand.
In New Zealand.
Yeah, and so that's really our biggest trail race. And so it gets thousands of runners. You get a lot of great runners coming internationally to do the race.
And just to make sure for our listeners, it's 100 miles, 160 kilometers.
Yeah, so I think it was 163 kilometers, and it's all on trails, a mixture of trails and some dirt roads. It's got a good amount of climbing, so you're constantly going up and down and up and down, and there's a lot of narrow, windy single track. And I haven't run a 100-mile race I haven't finished one since 2014. So it's been quite some years. And I prefer normally to do the slightly shorter races. It's still very long for the average runner. So somewhere between 50 and 100 kilometers is kind of the point that I find most suitable for me. But I really there's some part of me that had almost forgotten what it feels like to run 100 miles. And so I wanted to, again, put myself in a situation where I could learn something from going and doing this race, that distance. And so I had no expectations of what sort of outcome I was wanting. I wanted to go in with as much openness and as much humility as possible, because I think the really long and difficult events, the one great thing that they teach you is they push you right up against your own limitations. They show you in which way you are limited. And that's really, really useful as a human being, because it's very easy, because so much of our life exists in our own imagination and our own experience of life. We can often overvalue or overestimate our own capacities. And so every now and then you need to do something where you come up with the hard limits of your own physical reality, because otherwise you can be in some sort of, fantasy land where you think, anything I imagine I could be possible. And it also comes into play where people have this kind of idea that they're going to live forever. They don't want to face up to the harsh reality of life, that this is a finite game, that the fatality rate of life is 100%. And so we're all going to come up against that harsh reality of life. But we do a really good job of putting it off. We put it off and put it off, and we don't think about it, and we don't want to look at it. And for me, that's really one of the great lessons you get when you go out and do these hard things, because no matter how well you're trained and how strong you believe you are, at some point you're going to run up against some physical reality. And that's really what the 100-mile race does. So you can really race up to personally, I feel like I can race up to 100 kilometers. And so at that point,
and race, you mean run?
Yeah, really giving you like a really strong effort all the way. Then you've got to imagine that if you've done some 100-kilometer races, when you're getting to the end of a 100-kilometer race, you feel like, okay, that's good. Like, I feel like that's enough running for today. I'm quite content with that. I'm really happy to stop now. In the 100-mile race, at that point, you've still got more than 60 kilometers to go. And so you get there. And the great lesson for me in these races is one of the things we've already talked about, and that is the power of being in the present moment. And so for hours and hours out there, I'm just simply trying to bring myself back to the present moment, because the most possible suffering that you have out there is normally not happening in the present moment. So in the moment, your legs are really beat up and you're tired, you're fatigued, you would really like to stop, but you can keep going. It's not like you're in total agony at any particular moment. But
no, not even at kilometer 130 or 140?
No, like actually, as you get close to the end, you actually often start feeling a little bit better again, because you know that you're getting closer to the finish. But what really makes you suffer is your expectation of the future. So, for example, when I got to kilometer 118, there's an aid station there, and I left that aid station, and I knew at that point I had 44 kilometers to go. And at that point, your mind starts to come forward and starts to trying to calculate. So it starts saying, okay, 44 kilometers. So that's going to take maybe 5 hours, 5.5 hours. And when you start thinking, oh my God, I've got 5.5 hours to go, it's not that in that moment you feel completely destroyed. But if you think in that moment that, oh my God, for 5.5 hours more, I'm going to be still in this experience doing this thing, your mind, your expectation creates the sense of suffering that's actually much worse than the reality is in the moment. So it's really a game of trying to stay as present as possible. And I know a lot of people, like everyone doing the race, is really playing this game of counting down how many kilometers to go, and then trying to bring themselves back to the moment. And so I think it's one of the great proving grounds of your ability, or the great training grounds for that ability to keep bringing yourself back to the moment. Because as soon as I was thinking about 5.5 hours, I was really suffering. As soon as I brought myself back to the moment, it's manageable. Everything is...
Yeah, it reminds me of the people who are running our longest race, the 3,100-mile race, which, for those who don't know, it's the longest certified running race in the world, which is organized by the Sri Chinmoy Center every year in New York from August to November. Race takes 52 days. We'll talk about that in a later episode, maybe in more detail. But I remember that the runners there, they never want to hear their laps. So they have to complete a certain number of laps. They run around this school. It's like an 800-meter lap. It's really short. And they run that thousands of times during the whole race. But in a day, they know that they have to complete, let's say, 100 or 120 laps. But many runners never at any point want to know how many laps they have. And I think it's exactly for that reason. That it takes them out of the now, and it takes them into their mind. Really, that's what happens. And the mind is all about calculation and you get out of that pure enjoyment of the present moment, which is all in the heart. And that's where I think that's where the joy and the enjoyment lie of running a race, or of doing anything that's hard.
Yes. And so yeah, I did my best possible performance on that day. And so that's really all I'm looking for. I'm looking for, did I give myself fully to the experience? And perhaps if I'd had expectations and ideas of what I wanted to achieve coming in, I would have overvalued the finishing time and the placing and those types of things, and then undervalued the lessons and the experiences that I had on the way. And so I did end up finishing in a good placing. So I was 9th in my race. And so, but what I was more happy with was getting through that experience and doing it. There's a concept that I really love that comes from Japan, and it's called Gaman. And so Gaman is spelled Gaman, and it's one of the great key philosophies of Japanese culture, and it's something that they love and really admire. But the idea of Gaman is to endure seemingly unbearable suffering with poise and dignity.
Wow.
And
Very Japanese, very Japanese.
exactly. And so for the Japanese, it really encapsulates a lot of the things they love. And that's one of the reasons why they love marathon runners in Japan, because they see these people as practicing Gaman. They see them out there enduring seemingly unbearable suffering with poise and dignity. And that's the thing with the 100-mile races for me. For me, they're not so much a race. They're an experience of seemingly unbearable suffering. And so the game for me is, can I stay out there and do it with poise and dignity? Can I remain in alignment with my own values? Can I be cheerful? Can I be friendly and supportive and encouraging to all of the other runners? And I really feel like that's the thing I'm most proud about that race. Like if you talk to people who I ran with or came across on the course out there, I think everyone would say that I encouraged them and that I was cheerful and I was offering whatever I had available in that moment. And so that for me makes the event a success. If I started pitying myself and becoming bitter and resentful and cursing the world and the universe, like, why am I here and why am I having this experience? That to me would show like a real breakdown of my own values out there. And so I'm trying to get through the course. And at the end of the day, the result is I'll forget the result, but I will remember the fact that, yes, I managed to do this thing that was really difficult physically and mentally, but I did it in a way that I'm proud of, in a way that aligns with my values. So that for me allows me to be successful no matter what the outcome is, because the outcome, there's other factors. So, you cannot control how fast the other runners are running, or sometimes your body is not where it needs to be. You've been sick, or you've got a slight injury, you've got a slight imbalance. And so you're not going to be able to put out the physical performance perhaps that you imagined, but you can still come away and feel as though it was a complete victory, because it was another chance to practice living out your best self in the most trying of circumstances.
So what do you think of a guy like David Goggins, who's all about, suffering hard? Do you think he's practicing Gaman, or is it more... Because he's a very different style, this guy, right?
Exactly. And so I've talked about that before with especially a good friend of mine, Kerry Suter, who's another coach here in New Zealand. He talks about which lightsaber do you want to pull out. So if you think of Star Wars, there was two colors of lightsabers. There's the blue one, which the people on the good side of the Force are using the blue one.
The
and
Jedis.
Then people on, and this is like the Jedis, and the people on the other side have got a red lightsaber. And that kind of tells you something about the two different forces. And he always says to me, is there not a good time to pull out the red lightsaber and just, go with anger and frustration and bring all of that sort of lower vital energy and your aggression and all of your frustrations and anger with the world. And
some people seem to do well with that.
Exactly, because it is a strategy. It is a technique that you can use. Like a good example for someone who is like uber competitive would be Michael Jordan. So if you've ever seen the Michael Jordan sporting documentary, you will see someone who is so driven and so competitive in an almost psychopathic way. He is constantly looking for reasons to feel slighted by his opponents. He's constantly looking for reasons to be able to bring forward all of his anger and frustration and really crush his opponents. And so anyone can do that. Like, you can always find a reason to feel as though the world has mistreated you and hasn't appreciated you properly, and that your competitors haven't given you the respect that you deserve. And so you can choose to channel all of your aggression and frustration outwardly towards the world. And so I say, okay, that's a strategy, but how well does that strategy translate to all areas of your life? Because if I'm going to be doing something that's really meaningful and is also very difficult, I want to find a way to do it that's going to help me in as many other areas of my life as possible. And if I take this really aggressive, competitive, combative approach to life in my sporting life, it's also going to cross into all of the other areas of my life. So my relationships, my work life, because we're not a being that can sort of silo off different areas. I can't be in that way and swearing and cursing and angry and frustrated, and then think that when I come home and deal with my friends or my loved ones, that I'm going to be really lovely and calm and quiet and peaceful and really show them respect and be generous. And it's going to rub off into all of the areas of my life. So I find that if I can find a way of playing the game of ultra running or sports that actually aligns with my values, and my values are love, generosity, respect, compassion, self-giving. If I can make the sport a place where I can practice those things, that's actually then going to be beneficial in everything else I do in my life. So I'm practicing the way I want to live my life. And I think that's useful because you've got a finite amount of time here on earth and you've got a finite amount of energy. So sure, you could take the short-term approach of doing things with aggression and frustration and using the red lightsaber all the time and trying to defeat your enemies in that way. But if you really zoom out and think, okay, is that how I want to be seen in the world? Is that how I want to carry myself? Does that really align with my vision of the best possible version of myself? And so that's what I bring it back to. It's like you can take that approach, but you will pay a price for that. And if you can find a way of doing the hard things in your life, but doing them in a way that's balanced and in alignment with you and who you really want to be, then that seems the most beneficial strategy for me.
Yeah, I agree. That's beautifully put. So what is the role then of competition? Because competition seems to be very often ego-driven and seems to kind of bank on this idea of being successful and defeating your opponents at all costs. That is actually not how I have experienced competition. So when I was in my prime running days, when I had a competition, I used it to bring out the best in myself. So I tried to use the other runners not to see them as opponents, but to see them as kind of teammates who are helping me to bring out the best in myself. So when you're running along on a 10K race, for instance, which lasts, just over 30 minutes when I was in my best running days. And then it's so hard that when you run together with other people, it makes it easier. And somehow the idea of competition is, for me, it's to bring the best out of yourself, because you cannot bring the best out of yourself in your training. Somehow there's not that extra spark of motivation and, I guess, blessings or grace that descends when on competition day. I always used to run my fastest times on a competition day. So what is your take on that?
I totally agree. And that's really how I approach, especially these long races. For me, there's no point in feeling that I'm trying to defeat the other runners, because the most powerful adversary out there is not any other human being. It really is the course and the distance that you're challenging. That you're
and your own mind, like your own mind with its unwillingness and its limitations and sufferings that it brings.
So I think that the great distance of these types of events and say the 3,100 mile, I've heard it talked about as the concrete colossus, and so it's
Yes.
that
because it
really
runs on concrete pavement.
Yes.
For people to know, it's run on not even asphalt, but concrete pavement in New York City.
Yeah,
which is the hardest surface you can ever run on.
Exactly.
And you run almost 5,000.
Yeah, and so you see in those situations that's really your adversary. Like the other people are there also challenging the might of that distance. And so, like you said, if we can take each other as teammates and we're all trying to defeat the great opponent, which is the great distance that we're trying to cover, you can use those people and encourage each other, and you can lift each other and support each other. And that will make the whole experience so much easier, but also so much more fulfilling, I think. Because when you see the other people, and I think in a good year at that race, you really sense that. You really sense this unbelievable comradeship and oneness between the people doing that event. And I definitely feel that when I do these long ultra marathons. I think even more so than other events, you know, and when you talk to people who'd finished the race and the days afterwards, because you know how difficult it was for you to get to the finish line, you also know how impressive and difficult it is for them to get to the finish line. And even if someone finished 20 hours slower than I did, I'm still so in awe of their achievement of getting to that finish line, because it's an unbelievable achievement, an unbelievably difficult thing to do. So it creates a real spirit of a shared experience and a shared challenge. And I think that's why people really are now in this age we're living in, really enjoy these big challenges, because they take us out of the sport being all about just you and your result, and you feel like you're a part of a community. You feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And so how does that translate over to other areas of life? Because we've been talking a lot about running, but these lessons can be applied to our daily life as well, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see that translating over?
Exactly. So, I mean, in all of the other areas of our lives, there's very few areas where our lives is really a solo endeavor. Like, I mean, at the deepest level, everything we do is cooperative. So everything we're doing is relying on other people in some way. So, whether it's in your relationships, your friendships, your business, your career, your community, or whatever level you're looking at, it's all relational. And everyone at some point is dealing with the greatest competitor here is not distance, but it's time, and it's the finite nature of life. And we're really, in some ways, we're challenging the ignorance of the world. That's really our great competitor, because that's one of the natures of reality is there, in some way, there's some ignorance or lack of proper understanding, let's say. So all of us are dealing with not properly understanding the universe we're living in. And so that's what I would kind of describe as ignorance. So we've got an imperfect picture of the world. So we're going to do things that are stupid and don't make sense because we don't understand exactly where we are and what we're doing. And so I see the game of life as all of us here together trying to learn and understand reality and trying to grow and develop. And Ram Dass had a really great comment for it. He said, we're all here together walking each other home. And so to me, that really captures something about what the game is. We're all here dealing with this infinitely vast, complex universe. And we're trying to understand it in some way. And we're trying to live a life in a way that's a little bit more harmonious, a little bit more elegant. And I think Gaman is such a great quality to bring to bear in playing the game of life. And that's, for me, one of the reasons why I love it so much, because in some way, life is seemingly unbearable suffering. Because if you look at it from the Buddhist point of view, the Buddhists would say that all life is suffering. And you might say, well, hey, I'm quite comfortable at the moment. Like, I feel good. I've got a comfy seat and I've got food in the fridge. But over a long enough period of time, all life is suffering, because at some point, everyone will die. Everything that you've made and created will be lost, and you too will pass away. So if you're conscious of the bigger picture, there's always a sense of there's some impending suffering always at every moment. Yeah. But if you can be here and you can accept and deal with that situation, and you can make your way through life with poise and dignity, and being a brother or sister or a part of this world family, and trying to help the people around you, trying to offer service, be self-giving to them, trying to lift them up in whichever way you can. That seems to be an antidote to the nihilism that you could find. You could think, well, if everything is going to end up as dust, like, what is the point of doing anything? Yeah. The thing is, the point for me is you can make the whole thing worse than it is, or you can make the whole thing infinitely better than it is. The experience of humanity that we're all here sharing, you have the ability to influence that. And so you can, through your own consciousness and through your own thoughts and actions, you can make everything worse. Or on the other hand, you can make everything better. You could try and lift up everyone around you.
Yeah, and other people are very often a way to get out of your limited self, your ego.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons that we suffer, is that we suffer from ego.
Yeah.
We suffer from our separate sense of self, from our divided sense of self. Whereas in reality, we're all one. We're sharing a oneness reality. And that's when the suffering stops. I mean, that's when the Buddha speaks about the eightfold path towards enlightenment.
Yes.
And many spiritual masters have talked about that. And that's the idea when you realize your oneness with the entire universe. But because we live in our limited body and with the limited ego consciousness, we suffer from our being divided. And very often when you do something for somebody else, when you're motivated because you want to serve somebody or help somebody or make somebody's life better, it's this wonderful liberating feeling where you are kind of released from that sense of separateness and you share this oneness with that other person. And that's, I think, what, like you say, rings really true, that things like self-giving, service, community are things that help us get out of our limited ego and make us better people.
Yeah, and it even gets worse than that. The way we treat ourselves is often much worse than the way we treat others. And so we're so often so harsh and punitive on ourselves and so judgmental. Whereas there's a really great piece of research that was done that showed that if someone was unwell and they were given a medication to take that they knew was going to make them better, very few people actually take the medication properly. And so most people might take it for a day or two and then they kind of flag it and it ends up in the cupboard and never gets finished. But
this is from real life, right?
this is
really
from real
happens.
life.
Yeah.
But if your dog is sick, people are so good at taking their dogs to the vet and spending all this money on getting MRIs and tests done on their dog to see what's wrong with their dog. And then when they get given a medication or a treatment for their dog, people are really dedicated to giving the dog the medication and taking it all the way through. But so many people will not take themselves to get something checked up when they know there's obviously something wrong with them. So
that is weird. That is kind of weird.
It is a really unusual dynamic, and it's something about not seeing ourselves properly. And so because we're stuck inside our own perspective of the universe, we see other people as worthy of our compassion and our love and our support and our help. But we look at ourselves and very often our mind can be so judgmental and we can think, oh my God, I've done so many things wrong. Like, look at all my bad thoughts and the evil that I have done inside my own mind. And so we choose not to actually help ourselves. But when we look at the world, we see everyone else as, oh my God, look at these poor people. I feel so much love and compassion, want to help them. But we forget to realize that they've got the same internal dialogue going on with themselves. They're also being harsh and punitive and feeling as though perhaps they're unworthy of love and support.
So then there's this other, go on.
So we've got this wrong view of what we actually are, and so I think that's one of the great things to gain from our own practice is to realize that we're as much of a miracle as every single other being here. And we're just as beautiful and just as wondrous if we can learn to let go of that limited, egoic sense of self and instead see ourselves as other people see us.
Yeah, I think one of the secrets is to see the divine in yourself.
Yes.
If you can see this spark of whatever you want to call it, divinity, magic, light, luminosity, which is pervading the universe, but that is also what is your essence. So if you know that there's a divine consciousness or being living inside you, which is your soul, maybe you will treat yourself a little bit better and with more respect.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the solutions is to see the divine in others and to see the divine in yourself and to feel as if you have a guest living inside yourself, a divine guest, and you have to take care of that guest.
Yeah.
But I was also reminded of another piece of research that was quite astonishing. I find that people very often think of, if they think about society and how the world is going, they're often very pessimistic. But if they look at their own life, they say, oh yeah, I'm happy, everything is going well, but the world is really going to hell in a handbasket. And that was there was a research done in my country, in the Netherlands, where people, and it was an overwhelming percentage of people were quite happy with their own life, like they live in a wealthy country and they have everything taken care of. But then when they looked at the society at large, they thought, oh my God, it's going so bad. Everything is going. And that's also very funny discrepancy. Whereas the world is your own life in a sense. The world is your own day-to-day dealing. So if you're looking at the world and saying everything's going bad, but you yourself feel, my life is going quite well, there's kind of a strange discrepancy there.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't seem to be quite healthy.
And I see that all the time. And for me, what it comes down to is, so I know the research you're talking about. And so most people for their own lives, if you asked about their own life, they would say things are going in a very positive direction. They can see there's problems and challenges, but they can see in general, they're moving in the right direction. And it's the same with your friends and family. If I ask you how your friends and family are going, most people say, okay, there's probably a few little things, but in general, they're doing pretty well. And I see some hope. And then it's interesting, once you start extrapolating out to further and further levels of your own experience, that's when the discrepancy starts to appear. So it might be that you look at your own city and you might say, okay, my city, Amsterdam or Christchurch, like we'll say Christchurch, it's doing pretty well. Like we're recovering still from our earthquake many years ago, but there's a lot of interesting things happening and it's still a great place to live. So I see positivity about that. But if I ask them people, what do you think about the country? How's New Zealand doing? A lot of people say, oh, terrible. We're totally going in the wrong direction. We've got all these wrong. This is wrong. That's wrong. And then you say, well, how's the world going? And immediately, oh, it's a disaster. Like the whole thing is just going into chaos and rack and ruin. And the interesting thing for me is it seems to be the point where it crosses over from your personal experience to having to take information from other people. So because most
Well, I
people,
mean, the media play a big role in that,
yeah,
right?
obviously, and so
We get a lot of our,
that's one of the key things there. I think is that when you think about your own country and the world, you're relying on secondhand data. You're relying on information that other people are giving to you. And because media wants your attention and because you're so sensitive to negative information, they find it's more useful to tell you all of the things that are wrong with the place rather than all of the things that are going well with the place. And it's another level to that is that good things tend to happen incrementally while bad things happen suddenly. So when a plane crashes, it happens instantly in that moment. Whereas when hundreds of thousands of people move out of poverty, that happens over a slow, steady progression over years and weeks, months, and years. And so that then doesn't become news, but the plane crash or a murder or a natural disaster, all of these things become hyper focused on. And so that
it's really
starts to
funny
give you.
because I think it's funny because we often read the newspaper to know what's going on in the world, but what you actually read about are all the exceptions.
Yes.
Because it's all the things that normally don't happen that are published in a newspaper,
Yeah.
Why do I need to know that a roof burned down of a school somewhere in Africa? What has it got to do with my reality? But that is, like you say, we are so primed on negative information that the newspapers know that they sell more copies if the news is predominantly negative.
Yeah. And I would really like to do an episode on that at some point where we actually talk about the world and how it's going, because I have a very different point of view because I've been traveling so much and going to so many different places and just being totally amazed by the standard of living, the way it's improving, the evolution of the world I'm seeing, like in real time, like when I'm going places and I go back 5 years later or 10 years later and just seeing the tremendous progress going on in the world. It's so exciting for me and so inspiring. And it's nothing at all like the picture of the world that's often given to us. And so I'd really like, so let's file that away and we can definitely do an episode talking about that.
Yeah.
But let's go back to a moment. I do want to touch again on the idea of success versus progress. And I've got one idea that's quite interesting, I think, for you. And so the young generation at the moment have got this idea of a Sigma male. Have you heard of this concept?
I have not. Is this Gen Z?
So yeah, Sigma, SIGMA. And so when from my generation, I'm Gen X and you probably are as well. So our idea of a successful male from the point of view of our culture, we would often talk about these alpha males and these beta males. And so alpha males, I would really categorize people as people who've been successful in the game of being of that society. So whatever the society you live in, the alpha males are the people who are really successful in the game that's most predominant in that society. So for us, it might be people who've been really successful in business and finance and sports and playing that game of achieving fame and notoriety and material success. And so that's what we call an alpha male. And so in the Western world, that's really someone who has a lot of the traditional masculine qualities, we would say. So they're often leaders and dynamic, and maybe there's an undercurrent of aggression, but it's that type of ideal that we would put as, we'd say, oh, that person's an alpha male, like someone who's like a real leader in business or whatever they're doing. And then beta males were kind of considered people who were lacking in those qualities. So they were kind of people who were stand back and in some way were seen as weak or unsuccessful. But the young generation now, which is really interesting. So I was talking to some young people who are, young teenagers, and they have this concept of a Sigma male. And a Sigma male is outside of that paradigm of alphas. And so it's someone who is, they would say a Sigma male is someone you can see them because they're a male or a young male who is radically and authentically themselves. And they're creating their own rules to live by. So they're someone who's no longer conforming to the game of the society. And perhaps there's many reasons for that. And perhaps one of the reasons is they see perhaps now more than ever, it's becoming more difficult perhaps for them to be successful in a traditional way, to to have a big house and a car and a really successful business. Like all of these things are becoming more and more competitive and more difficult to achieve. And so the idea of a Sigma male is it's this whole different paradigm that now something to aspire towards is being radically, authentically yourself and creating your own set of values and living by those. And so to me, that's radically exciting because that lines up much more with what we've been talking about. So the idea of success versus progress. So if you're focusing on a progress-based life, one of the first things you need to do is need to start to inquire, like, who am I? And so we've talked about that in previous episodes. So for people who are interested, definitely go back and have a listen. And we've talked about the idea of what sort of being we are and what sort of universe we're living in.
Episode 2 for those who haven't caught on.
Yeah. So because one of the key things, like if you're going to live a Sigma life and be radically, authentically yourself, you need to actually start doing some digging and start developing that self-awareness to actually start to understand who am I and what sort of qualities do I want to manifest in the world. And so doing some practice, doing your spiritual practice of becoming aware, so doing your meditation or breath work or your meditative movements or whatever it is, but doing that self-reflection and being present with yourself and starting to develop a truer, more complex and more interesting picture of who you are, and then starting to be able to live those qualities out. And so they would call that the Sigma life, but I would say that lines up so well with what we're trying to do in the spiritual game. And so perhaps anyone who's hoping to become a Sigma, perhaps what you need is meditation, because you need to know thyself first. And then
that's definitely true. Yeah, I would say it's important the place where you get those values from, because they are already there inside you, and they're very rock solid, eternal values that are kind of aligned with a much larger view of the universe and of life in it. But do get them from your inner life, I would say, I agree with you that meditation is a wonderful tool to do that.
Yeah, because you want to think, if the ideal qualities are constantly changing. So if you say, at this time we're living in, the ideal qualities to have are so different from in the past, then in some ways they're not really true or transcendent in some way. Because for me, for something to be true and real on the deeper sense, it has to work now, it has to work 500 years in the future, and has to work 500 years in the past. And so if you think that there's a set of qualities that you could use to live in the world now that would not also work in the future and wouldn't have worked in the past, then perhaps they're a shortcut, perhaps, or they're a way of, perhaps earning some unearned power or virtue. Because the great thing is when you look back and see at the qualities that people were talking about in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, you read something from Marcus Aurelius, you're like, wow, that is exactly the information that I could use in my day-to-day life right here, right now.
Yeah, exactly. You resonate with that. And that resonance is that transcendent quality. So because they are true over such long periods of time, I would say eternity, they resonate so powerfully with us. And I can predict they will also be true in the year 35,
Yes, exactly. And I'll look forward to see. They might look slightly different, or the manifestation should look slightly different for the age that you're in. But anyone who's playing games in this time and thinking that being inauthentic is going to be successful, but they think maybe, in social media, that allows me to be totally inauthentic and I can create this false persona and I'm going to create a character and that's going to make me really successful. That may allow you to be successful in one game in a very short period, over a short period of time, but over long enough periods of time, there are ways of being in the world that are transcendent. There are ways of being that will allow you to be successful in the most possible areas of your life over the longest possible time. And I think that's really what people should be looking for. And sometimes you have to look back to see what those qualities are.
Yeah. And I've also talked to a friend of mine who is also from this Gen Z generation, I think so. Anyway, he's 23 years old. And he told me that his generation really knows how to spot authenticity from inauthenticity.
Yeah.
So they know immediately when they see something online, if it's like, if it's BS, if it's not true, or if it's false, or if there's some truth in it. And that's right. And you see many times that nowadays things that grow big on social media, sometimes they're very authentic things. So they may not be very, well produced or have high production quality, but it's just somebody maybe talking to a camera and it's really authentic.
Yeah.
That kind of takes off. I think that's a very good thing. I applaud that.
Yeah, and that's cool to see, because we did talk in a previous episode about this being the age of discernment. And because of the amount of content and material that we're bombarded with, it's really good to see then that the young generation are developing that discernment. And I think all of us as slightly older people, we actually also need to look at our own discernment and become more careful, perhaps, in the way we consume information, and just really try and paying attention, like you said, to does this ring true, and is this source credible and authentic and real?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it's so hard to know these days with the information environment we're living in.
Oh, yes, there's a lot of false information out there for sure. So I think something that has to resonate. So that's why when you dive within and you develop those intuitive faculties, when you know something is true, you know it in your heart. And that may sound very, la-di-da or vague, but on a very deep level, that's so true. And I've noticed it so many times when something is true, when you hear spiritual truths being explained, very often when people hear that, they say to themselves, I know this already. When they speak about spiritual wisdom, you kind of know it already. And that's the beautiful thing. You do know it already, but it's just that maybe you'd forgotten it, or like life had come over it and you didn't remember it. But something in you resonates with those ideas. Something in you perks up and says, hey, this is true, and this is true forever. And those intuitive qualities you can definitely develop. You can train them just like you can train muscles. So these discernments that you talked about, discernment is also a quality that you can train. And the more sharp and aware you become, the sharper your sword of discernment becomes. It's a sword that you need to sharpen. And what I liked about the Sigma male also is that I think it's a sign of that we're really living in a transitional time, because that new generation realizes we cannot rely anymore on the old systems. Like, they know they cannot rely anymore on the old media telling them what is true and what is not true. And we have all these new media popping up, and which is super revolutionary, like the technology that's available nowadays, where we can have these discussions. You're in New Zealand, I'm in Amsterdam, and we can talk, and also produce this content and share it with the world. That is so unique, and that is so novel and new. And of course, that means that old systems, are crumbling as well. And you see that happening, right? You see that the traditional legacy media is losing ground rapidly. And it's beautiful that these new generation knows I cannot get my values anymore from those old structures. I have to recreate them. As long as my society, my culture is not providing a satisfactory answer, which is the sign that we're living in transitional times. We're transitioning into a new, I hope, better developed world, that they have to do that themselves. They have to go within and get the values from their own authentic selves.
Beautiful. Well put. Very well said. So let's really try and help people here practically. So let's try and sketch out a little bit of map for them. So if you want to try and change your life from being focused on success, which is perhaps unconsciously what you were doing, and instead now you think, okay, great, I want a progress-based life. Like, that's me. Like, I'm all about that. So what are the concrete steps that you need to take? And I've got a few ideas. So maybe I'll share a couple of those, and then you can help me fill in any gaps for people. So I think, like we already mentioned, that the key first element of a progress-based life is know thyself. And so for that, you need a practice. Like, you can't just suddenly go from your everyday state of awareness and then think somehow you're going to radically transform your everyday state of awareness without doing any work to achieve that. Because you've practiced being who you are and interacting with the world in a particular way for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 60 years. So
what kind of practice are you talking about?
So yes, I'm talking about a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice of some description. So learning to bring yourself into the present moment and really pay attention, because mindfulness. So let's take the foundation as a practice in the morning. So every morning, if you sit there and do a practice to connect with yourself and to the present moment. So you sit there and you do your meditation. So you sit there, let all thoughts go, focus on your breath, and then for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you're there. And in that moment, you're trying to remain deeply immersed in the present moment, in the existence and the experience of the present moment. So if your thoughts come and take you away, you simply let them go, bring yourself back. And so that's the basis of the practice. And the same would be with your breath work. You're focusing on the breath and you're doing a practice for that period of time. But during that practice, you're trying to keep yourself fully focused on the present moment. You're trying to stay in it here and right here in the here and now. And if you're doing Tai Chi or yoga, you can do the same sort of thing through a movement-based approach. But then what's important is your mindfulness throughout the day. So it's no point just practicing in the morning and then going into the world and reverting to an already always way of seeing the world, just like going on automatic pilot and just being very reactive to the situations around you. If you've gone to the effort of developing that connection with yourself and to being present in the moment, you then want to bring some of that awareness into all of the interactions you have. You want to be so mindfulness is very simple. At its simplest level, it's simply having your awareness where you are, like having your full awareness where you are and doing what you're doing.
Yeah, there's a famous quote by a Zen master who said, one of his students asked, "Master, please explain what is Zen?" And he said, "When I eat, I eat. When I sit, I sit. When I walk, I walk. This is Zen."
That is Zen.
Boom.
That is
What a truth bomb.
That is the sort of thinking that I just love. Basically, that's what we're trying to do. So because a lot of people think, oh, well, that's what I do already. Like when I eat, I eat. And it's like, really? Is that really what you're doing? When you're sitting there eating, if I could project what was going on inside you onto a screen, would I simply see the experience of the taste and the flavor, the smell?
Oh, no, you would see like tomorrow's football game that they're thinking about, or let's say fight that they had with their colleague at work.
Exactly.
And you would see, the stress that they would experience and all these things.
So very often we're not doing what we're doing. So that's a really powerful thing when you start bringing yourself into the moment and start bringing your awareness to what you're doing. So when you're at work, be at work. Be there with the person, interacting with that customer, interacting with the waffle irons, interacting with that musical instrument you're tuning. And so when you start doing that on a regular basis, like any practice, you get much better at it. So when we start off doing something, our capacity is always low because we have no experience. And as we begin our practice, we refine and we strengthen ourselves. And so at some point, you want to think that you could get to a place where you go about your daily activity. And when you're driving your car, you're simply driving your car. And someone might think, but isn't that boring? Like, isn't it boring? Like, isn't reality just completely boring? And I would say the thing that will shock you the most about reality is how unbelievably interesting it is when you bring your full awareness to it.
So tell me what happens then? Because if I just put myself in the shoes of somebody who would find it boring, you say, okay, drive your car, you're looking at the road, you're seeing a road with asphalt, you're seeing other cars come by. How is that interesting?
So there is something wondrously magical about paying attention, like bringing all of your attention into the moment, and you start to glimpse little things that you would normally filter out. So like we say, the mind is a filter. And so the nature of the mind is it wants to give you the most simplistic picture of the world possible. So very often your picture of the world you think of, which is boring, is this very boring picture you're creating because your mind is filtering out anything interesting and simply giving you, okay, it's just the road, there's the traffic lights, there's nothing else going on here. But as you start to bring more of your awareness into the moment, your awareness expands. And you start to see that, oh my God, this road I've driven down 1,000 times before. I've never noticed that really interesting house here on the corner. Or I've never noticed that beautiful garden. And I've never seen this person riding this amazing looking bicycle before. And so suddenly you start taking in so much more of what is going on in every moment. And you start to realize that your picture of the world was actually completely inaccurate. It was a very simplistic picture of the world, and it stopped you being fully present because you already thought you knew everything that was going to happen. So you didn't see what was actually happening. So because you already had this expectation in your mind, you blocked out everything else. And so you're not seeing the world as it is.
One other thing I would add is if you do the practice, if you become still, there are things coming to the fore that are not visible or tangible with the five senses, but a sense of peace. Peace is something real. If you experience peace, it is so real and it's so beautiful. And I think also that can come to the fore when you become present and you manage to still your thoughts through your practice. You can experience real inner peace and joy and happiness in the world. And this is often the case when people have these experiences. They walk on the street and all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, they feel this great happiness. It's not that somebody paid them a compliment or that they made a promotion. No, they just, at that moment, they have an experience of the heart, of being fully present. And they feel this wondrous sensation. They look around and maybe they see the beauty of the buildings around them and of nature and of this beautiful tree. And they're just in the moment. And this creates such a wonderful feeling of well-being and happiness. And that is also something, because I agree with you, that is also something that comes from the practice. Normally these moments would fade away again. And, people are like, oh, if only I could be in that moment longer. But through the practice, these moments become more and more, they become more and more real and lasting in your life.
And yeah, I mean, both you and I are a living testament to that fact, I think, because you obviously have those experiences. And I often find myself that when my practice is going well and I'm living in a way that's in alignment with who I want to become and who I see myself as, that I'll be doing the most simple thing and it suddenly becomes infused with great joy and great meaning. And it might be something completely mundane. Like usually I would take it as being completely mundane, but when I have my full awareness and that sense of peace inside me, it becomes just so enjoyable. And there's something about simply the truest state of consciousness. If you dive down into the deepest consciousness, it's like diving down into the depths of the ocean. So up in your mind, it's this turbulent sea of ideas and the waves are crashing and seagulls are squawking and the oil tankers are passing by. But when you dive down into the depths of the ocean or the depths of yourself, there's this unbelievable sense of peace and tranquility there. And I really believe that is often the thing that people are searching for more than anything. So all of this success that people are trying to find in the outer world and the outer circumstances would be answered if they could simply feel just the peace and the joy of existence that was within them at all times. And so it's
I had an experience like that the other day in my waffle restaurant. I was just there. It was the end of the day. I'd served all these people, and I just felt so happy. And I thought to myself, I don't need anything from life. This is it. Life is just perfect right now. I'm so simple. I'm in my little lunchroom, cafeteria, restaurant, and I'm so filled with this feeling of joy and happiness and fullness. Life has such fullness if you have that experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I resonate with that.
So let's keep going with this map
Sure.
of the life progress-based individuals.
Yes, I want to know what's next.
So yes, first of all, you're going to do your practice. And so that's really key. And so from that, you start to learn more about who you truly are. And you start to get a sense of what types of behaviors resonate with you and what types of behaviors don't resonate with you. So perhaps you start to look at yourself and you start to see that some actions and sometimes the way you act, it's not in harmony with who you are anymore. So perhaps you are in a habit of getting angry or jealous or frustrated at people, and you start to realize that that's actually not who you really are. That's a series of behaviors and patterns that you've picked up through your experiences here on Earth. But at a deep level, that's not actually fundamentally who you are, and it no longer serves you and it no longer aligns with you. So you start to move away from those things, and you start to see the qualities that when you act them out, they start to make you feel more aligned. They start to make you feel more real and authentic. And so there's this wonderful process of, in the game of life on a daily basis, you're paying attention and you're seeing things, little actions that you're taking, and realizing, okay, that's no longer serving me, and I need to let that go. And like, this is something that is serving me, and I need to lean into that. That's something that I want to bring more of. So it makes your life become a wonderfully engaging experience. You're no longer just going about your day-to-day business, but instead you're watching yourself and you're seeing the moments where, I caught myself. I saw myself doing something that is not truly me. It's no longer serving me. So you catch yourself and you let it go. And you see things, okay, this action, like when I do that, there's something about that when I'm self-giving, or when I'm empathetic, or when I'm kind to someone, or when I really listen, or whatever it is, you see that is actually who I am. That is part of who I am. And I want more of that. I want to manifest that more in my life. So I think that's the second step to living this progress-based life. And then the third thing I would say is perhaps intuition, because that's something like, until you get your intuition working, you're dealing with an incredible amount of complexity, and you're like trying to flail around to try and find what's the right action to take. And life should be natural and spontaneous. Like, if you're really living your best possible life, it should flow so naturally and spontaneously that you should always find yourself saying the right thing and doing the right thing. And very few of us are at that point, so we're often saying the wrong things and doing the wrong things. But the thing that will really help guide us to that point is learning to listen to our own intuition. So it's like one of the early episodes we talked about, there's two types of religious traditions. So there's a scriptural tradition, and then there's a teacher-based tradition, or a dialectic tradition. And the scriptures have done a great job of trying to answer all of the questions of life. But because they are static in some way, or fixed at the particular time they're written, it's very difficult for them to update for changing circumstances. Whereas when we're living a life based on trying to live teaching out, so we've been given some ideas and we're trying to put it into practice in our lives, that's something that's very vibrant, and it's constantly transforming, because the world is constantly transforming in front of our eyes. And so when we can live in that type of way, we're not trying to find all of the answers from some ancient text for what to do in each moment, because obviously that's going to be incredibly difficult. So even if you have a really deep philosophical understanding of the holy books, still you'll find yourself in circumstances where it's unclear whether you should act in this way or that way. And in those moments, if you can learn to develop and trust your own intuition, your intuition is going to be the best possible guide to help you act in the best possible way for you personally in those moments.
Yeah. So would you say intuition is the voice of the soul, the voice
Yes.
of your highest self?
Yeah,
speaking
part
to you?
of yourself, and it's trying to get you on the right track. It's constantly trying to serve you. But because we don't understand its language, as we said, like it speaks in the language of silence, and it speaks in a very subtle way, like a subtle breeze, a beautiful spring breeze, just pushing us to vaguely, faintly towards one possible outcome. Because a good example is when we make decisions, we often think that we're rational beings and that we're living in a time of rationality. And so when I want to make a decision, I need to look at all the information. So if I'm trying to choose, do I want to go here or go there? Do I want this job or that job? I might start making all of these lists. I might make this list of all the pros and cons of taking this option, and all the pros and cons of the alternate option. And then I'll look at them and I'll try and weigh up and see which is going to be the best option for me. The problem is we're dealing with infinite information. And so if you're looking at two possible jobs, there's no way for you to possibly know from looking at the external reality which one of those jobs is going to be more fulfilling over the next year or 6 months. So you could think, okay, this one has this strength, this one has this strength, but you don't know that when you start working there, some of the colleagues will leave and something will change and a new manager will come in. So there's so much that we don't know.
So much uncertainty. Too much uncertainty.
The uncertainty will come and throw a spanner into the best laid plans. And so if instead of trusting that, because there's a really funny idea that often we spend, weeks and months trying to agonize over a decision. And at the last moment, we still just make a snap decision. So for like 6 months, we've been thinking, should I do this or this? And at the end of it, it's still unclear. And at the last moment, say, oh, I'm going to just do that one. And so you could have made that decision right at the beginning, and you would have saved yourself 6 months of agonizing over whether I should do this or this. And that's one of the other things as well, is never be afraid of making decisions. Like, I think it's much better to make a decision than not make a decision. Like, if you're always being a passive person in life and not making choices, you're like, oh, I don't know. You're not saving yourself. You're just creating yourself a different type of suffering. Whereas if you just go into the world and say, okay, I'm going to try and trust myself to make the best possible decisions, and just start making decisions every day. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. And to start with, your aim may be horribly off, and you may cause all sorts of stupid calamities for yourself. But if you do it sincerely and you've got your practice, your daily practice, so you're trying to become more aware, I guarantee you that over a long enough period of time, you will start to refine your aim and you will start to make decisions in a way that you couldn't imagine when you started doing that. And so a good example is a lot of people will ask me, how do you know where to go each year? Like, you seem to have these ideas to go to all of these places. And
that's in your case because you travel so much.
Yeah, exactly. So in my case, when I'm planning my travels for the year, I just suddenly have these moments where I think, oh, I need to go to Kenya. There's something about Kenya. There's some experience. There's some information there or some revelation or there's something for me in that place. And it's really interesting that the more I trust that inner feeling, the better the outcomes become. And I really feel as well, if you're sincerely trying to make the right decision and trying to follow the divinity within you, it's not going to let you down. It's not going to let you go wildly off course if you're doing it sincerely. And so that's what I always think to myself. If my ideas are getting too out of alignment with what the universe wants for me and what my soul wants for me, like, things will fall apart, things will crash and burn, and things won't work out for me. And sometimes I feel that, like, if I think I should do a certain thing, and then suddenly all these roadblocks start appearing, and suddenly all this friction starts happening, I think, oh, perhaps I need to revisit that. Perhaps I need to take a step back and again look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, very true. I think I have a lot of examples and personal experiences and anecdotes with that, and I think we should save those for a future episode because that is such a beautiful wide topic. How to, trust your intuition and develop that.
Yeah. So let's quickly, because we're getting towards the end of the show.
Yes.
So this map of how to live the life of a progressive human being. So first of all, you're going to start with your practice. You're going to become more aware. Then you're going to bring that awareness into your day-to-day life. So you're going to pay attention to all of the interactions you have. And then you're going to also start trying to listen to the voice of intuition, the voice of the soul. And you're going to start letting that guide some of your decisions. And if you let it just guide a few decisions every day or every week or every month, and you follow the voice of the soul, and then you pay attention to the results you get, you start to realize your life becomes so much better when you listen to that. So that's the first few steps. Then this is one that I've been thinking about that I think is actually a really powerful idea, which a lot of people are really interested in. It's also an idea of our times, and that's gratitude. So when we start offering gratitude, what we're doing is we're thanking the universe for what we have. So we're focusing on what we've been given. We're focusing on the gifts that we have been given instead of always focusing on what we're lacking. And so we're looking at the positive side rather than the negative side. And so I've been thinking a long time about gratitude. Like, why is gratitude so useful and powerful? Because obviously spiritual masters have talked about the power of gratitude. And then also in our culture now, there's this whole idea of having a gratitude journal and every day sitting down. And so I think what you're doing is you're looking at the positive aspect of life. So you're putting your intention on, thank you, universe, for this, and this, for blessing me with these opportunities, with these people, with these situations, whatever it is. And we're giving thanks for that which is good in our lives. And so that takes us away from that mindset where we're constantly comparing ourselves to what we don't have. And that's really one of the main mindsets that causes us so much suffering, is that lack of, that scarcity mindset, that mindset that we don't have what we would like to have. And so there's a yawning gulf which causes suffering between what we have and where we are and where we think we should be. And so gratitude is a tremendously powerful force. And we'll talk about it in future episodes as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think just touching on that, I think that gives you a little bit of a guide of what it would look like of living a life based on progress. If you start to do those steps, you start to see and value your life in a different way. You start to see what the universe is giving you, and you start to pay attention to that. And so, okay, the universe is giving me this. I'm going to offer gratitude for that. And then you start learning lessons from it. You start to say, okay, I don't understand the entire universe. It's far too vast and complex for me to understand in any theoretical sense. But if I can trust that the universe is giving me experiences that are going to be useful for me and that I can learn something, then that's a tremendously powerful position to put yourself in. And I actually have a nice quote from one of the greatest thinkers of recent times, Albert Einstein. And his quote was, the most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe.
Wow.
And that's fascinating because here was someone who was really trying to understand the universe in a really fundamental way. But he still saw that that was one of the most important things, or the most important decision you ever make is, do I believe I live in a hostile universe? Or do I believe in a universe that has my own well-being and growth and development? Is it friendly to me?
Yeah.
And when you realize that that is a choice that you have to make, and you look at the outcome of the two different decisions you can make, they're radically different. Your life would be radically different. If you choose to believe you live in a friendly universe, which is my position, you take that position, the universe is giving me experiences that it believes that I can handle and that are going to help me grow and develop. And so even if they're not the experiences I perhaps personally thought I needed or wanted, believing that there is some wisdom to the universe beyond my wisdom, and that the universe sees my capacity far more clearly than I see my own capacity, you start to find yourself in this great relationship with the universe where you're having experiences and you're attempting to learn from them. If you take the other position that you live in a hostile universe, my God, like that makes things tough. Like that's the sort of person who's living in the scarcity mindset and is trying to build up this huge bank balance because they believe that the universe is hostile and constantly trying to kill them.
Yeah.
Because in some levels it is, but perhaps it's doing it for your own good. And so I think that really captures something really beautiful.
Yeah, and that's we may call this for our Gen Z listeners, if we have any, the manual for the Sigma male and Sigma female. Right there, you got it.
The Sigma life, it could be yours, but you have
Sigma life.
Because the thing is, people will know and feel and see if you are authentically being yourself, or if you're just doing a caricature of someone doing that. So
absolutely.
And often when you're young, you don't really know yourself that well. So you see young people often acting like, trying to put on different personas to try and come across as confident and powerful and knowing what they're doing. But I think when it really comes from deep within, it has a deep power and weight to it, and it has an authenticity to it that people will feel and know. And I feel that myself when I go out into the world. There's certain people that I feel I resonate with because I feel inside them that some authenticity. I see that this is someone who's attempting to be truly themselves and align with who they fundamentally are. And so I find those people far more interesting to interact with than people that I feel as though that there's perhaps lack of wisdom or a lack of depth or a lack of awareness in who they're acting out. So, and each of us will resonate with different people and find different people will connect with us more deeply. But it's definitely worthwhile playing this game, because what's your other option? It's like play the game of living in a hostile universe and constantly trying
don't play that game.
Protect yourself
it's not
from the
It's kind of Squid Game, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like Squid Game, that series where everybody dies and everything. I never saw it, but it's pretty horrendous. It's a hostile universe. But I would say we live in a friendly universe. Be radically authentic. Live the progress-based life.
Yes.
Don't be so obsessed with success. It's not going to fulfill you in the long term. And I would say choose a path in life that challenges you and that inspires you to bring out the best of you.
Yes.
And your life will be unbelievably interesting, beautiful, and worth living.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You've got a finite period of time here. So you need to choose, do you want this to be the most radically interesting life possible? Or do you want to succumb to the limited thinking that is going to make you live small, do you want to live a small and mediocre life? Or do you want to really perhaps try and see what is truly inside me and what could I possibly bring out?
Yeah. I do choose the first option, but I'm also getting quite tired because it's getting late here. So now I'm just choosing the small, mediocre life, and we have to wrap up this podcast.
Well,
so
thank you. Thank you very much. It's a lovely discussion with you, and I look forward to seeing where it goes next week.
Absolutely. And thank you too for your wisdom and your absolutely amazing, cheerful attitude for life and sharing all that wisdom with us.
Thank you.
And so if you like our podcast, dear listeners, please consider subscribing. We have one episode dropping every Wednesday morning, Amsterdam time. So that's Wednesday evening if you live in New Zealand. And see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Super, man.